Hey everyone, I mentioned in my maintenance video a couple of days ago that we're going to be getting dream evolutions. I didn't mention what they were since I wanted to save it for its own video, but I think going forward, whenever we get a new batch of dream evolutions, I'll do a video similar to the one I'm about to do. Basically, I'll be going over the buffs that each of the units are going to be getting, as well as which passive I think you should choose from the selectable passives. But anyways, starting off with the first unit, Clyde. Some of his newer buffs include some modifier increases for his art and true art, noticeably with his true art now at 45,000. His skill also has the added effect of 10 arts, and rather than a high chance at burning, his true art now has a 100% chance to burn. By itself, it's nothing too impressive. The 100% chance to burn is very nice for sure, although he doesn't lower any burn resist in his kit, but that's not too bad anyways. His art also has the added effect of a buff from a chance to burn to a 50% chance to burn. He'll also be getting the added effect of arts on skill, but to be honest, that multiplier increase isn't actually the worst. Worst case scenario, beginners could potentially use him though. As for his new dream passives, he'll have two to select from. Crimson Dream, which gives him 200% damage to earth units, versus Luminous Dream, which will give him 100% crit rate if he's above 80% health. Out of the two, you're definitely going to want to choose the 200% earth damage up. I know that it's very niche in the sense he'll only be usable against earth units, but that's completely fine. I'd rather him be potentially usable rather than having no damage up with passive crit for only 25% extra damage from that crit. With his true weapon included, Clyde is going to have a crazily stupid 300% total damage against earth enemies, and to be honest, with his new multiplier, I think it could potentially put up some damage. I'm aware he won't be winning any damage contests, but if you happen to be against an earth enemy, you could unironically have some fun by using Clyde as a potential DPS instead of the same bread and butter units. And compared to Clyde before his buffs, being able to actually use him somewhere, albeit not efficiently, is definitely a breath of fresh air. Moving on to the next unit, Corsair. Her art and true art got some modifier buffs, nothing too crazy, and her true art was buffed from a high chance to freeze to a 100% chance to freeze. And as the unit you'd want to choose to start for her freeze, being able to guarantee that is very solid for sure, not bad. As for her new passives, she has two as well, and for her Aqueous Stream, it adds the effect of lowering freeze resistance by 30% for 30 seconds onto her art, whereas her Spectral Dream increases her arts by 200 at the start of the quest. And since it's the start of the quest and not at the start of the battle, it won't be refreshing her arts between waves. You only get that 200 arts once you start the game. Out of these two, you're definitely going to want to choose the Aqueous Stream, and the reason is that by choosing it, she'll become an even better freeze unit for those who need a freezer. Considering she's already suggested to be the chosen unit at the start for her niche of freezing, being able to lower freeze resist will allow her to be able to freeze on the harder quests that might have some freeze resistance to it. Overall though, it's not the craziest buffs, but she's now slightly more usable as a freeze unit, which is definitely nice, but nothing that can't be replaced by newer units. Moving to the next unit, Arth. Both his art and true art got some modifier buffs as well as break buffs. What makes no sense to me is why his art got a crazily high 1200 break buff, whereas his true art only got 200 or more. And considering there's no effect on his art, there's literally zero reason to use his art at all, so they basically didn't even increase his break by anything that's worth noting, since you're only gonna really be using his true art anyways. So that's the only buff that actually matters, and it's only 200, which, I mean, considering it's 9500 already, I can understand why they didn't want to go too much higher. But moving on to his passives, he'll have two passives. His first Crimson Dream autofills all allies' arts by 1 a second, whereas his Verdant Dream will give him 70% damage to water enemies, as well as 70% break power to water enemies. While that arts gauge would be nice for a team, choosing it would just make him a deadweight to the team when you could choose a Verdant Dream. Using it, he'll actually become a usable breaker against water units, and that's certainly very nice, especially with his 9500 break on true art. The damage is whatever since he's not really the best at damaging, although with his true weapon, he'll have a 170% damage buff to water enemies, but his true art only has a 30,000 damage modifier, so it's not like he'll be doing any damage anyways. But overall, he's still not the best unit, of course, although if you need a breaker for a water boss, he's actually very good, considering that 70% is going to scale very heavily with his 9500 break on true art. And him actually being a usable breaker is definitely really nice. Moving to the next unit, Roy. His arts and true art got some fairly noticeable modifier increases, as well as slightly more break, and an additional 50% break while using his arts during an enemy's art, to make 200% total break while an enemy arts. Definitely not the worst, 200 break will make a noticeable difference in breaking. His true art also now has a 100% chance to ultimate freeze rather than a high chance, so that's pretty nice. His passive also received a buff to now give all allies 20% damage reduction, as well as 50% attack up for Reyes. That damage resist buff was definitely a curveball. 20% damage resistance for the entire team for literally doing nothing is insanely strong for no reason. Shiro gives 30% when he enters his mode, so the fact that a non-damage resist buffer gives a fairly strong amount passively is very welcome. The attack up for Reyes is pretty nice though, although nothing game breaking. As for his 2 new Dream passives, for Crimson Dream, he receives 300% crit damage up, whereas his Aqueous Dream gives him 80% break power up against fire units and 3 arts a second. These 2 passives were definitely one of the harder to choose between, to be honest, because on one hand, that 300% crit damage is obviously insane, and considering his true art ultimate freezes, which lowers crit resist by 100%, that'll make his attacks insanely strong and actually becomes a viable DPS. Although the downside is that crit from ultimate freeze is only if you're actually able to freeze, unless of course you have a crit buffer or something. Whereas if you choose Aqueous Stream against fire enemies, he becomes an actual threatening breaker, sitting at around 280% break power up during their arts, meaning that his arts is going to be doing 13,300 break during an art, which will melt the boss's break bar. As well as that strong passive 3 arts a second, which will make him a lot better sustaining himself. But after thinking about it for a bit, nothing in his kit is too oriented after fire units, and I think if you're using him as a breaker, he's already doing a ton with his arts to make it where it doesn't make sense to limit it to fire units while losing out on the 300% crit damage. So of course I'm going to be saying you should choose Crimson Dream for that heavy 300% crit damage up. And while it may seem like not the best choice since his crits rely on the ultimate freeze without external buffing, that's completely fine, because as a beginner, Roy can actually be a fairly potent DPS for all the beginning content that you're going to do. And with his passive damage resist for the team, they'll have a lot more survivability for the harder missions. Overall, his buffs were definitely the best of everyone so far, and to be honest, I could see myself using him despite him not being too meta. He just seems very fun to use overall though, especially with the ultimate freeze. And for beginners, his 300% crit damage buff is gonna wipe nearly all beginner to amateur content, which is pretty nice to see from such an old unit. For the next unit though, Elise, she had very small modifier buffs across the board, although she did get some chunky heal buffs on her art and true art, and they really thought that they did something buffing both her art and true art break power by 50, like that's anything. Anyways, as for her dream passives, she actually has 3 to choose from, which is very interesting. For her first, Verdant Dream, she increases everyone's heal amount by 30% and fills her arts by 2 a second. Luminous Dreams autofills all light allies' arts by 2 a second, whereas her passive Spectral Dream is going to buff all allies' dark resist by 20%. These are certainly a wide range of passives and they each have their own merits. But out of all of them, it'll definitely come down to either Luminous Dream or Spectral Dream, since Verdant Dream isn't going to be game-changing heal-wise for the team since Elise already doesn't do too much heal-wise. Out of the 2 though, I'd definitely go with Luminous Dream since 2 arts for a light team is insanely valuable and strong, but that 20% dark resist is solid on some of the harder missions against dark enemies, so it could see some use on the nicher stages. For the last unit though, Xenon, he did get some modifier increases. He also got 10% more BE output on his skill. The arts on his art now lasts for 15 seconds rather than 10, meaning that the team gets 45 arts rather than 30. And his true art now only costs 10% of his health rather than 25%. Nothing too crazy, although his art giving that extra 15 arts is definitely nice. For his 2 new passives, Aqueous Stream gives him 100% freeze resist as well as 100% damage to light enemies, whereas his Spectral Dream gives all demon units 2 arts a second. I think that the choice here is pretty obvious, but Spectral Dream is definitely the clear winner. A team of demons getting 2 arts a second is very strong, and compared to the 100% light damage, it'll be much better over time. Considering Xenon doesn't really do any damage, that 100% light damage would have ended up being wasted anyways. There are also going to be 3 new equips based on the Blade Masters, the first being the 5-star support Swords God Proof. It gives all allies 3 arts a second for 10 seconds, and if the user is fire, it increases their skill CT by 120% for 10 seconds with a 50-second CT. Nothing too game breaking, and considering it's on the free banner, it'll definitely be nice for the newer players, but nearly all newer art gen items are definitely going to be better than this. The next is the 5-star defense Frozen Empress's Proof. It lowers the target's damage by 33% and water damage by 66% for 8 seconds with a 30-second CT. It's literally just the water version of C-Band, and on stages with a water boss, this equip is actually going to be fairly potent. That is, of course, if you're using a tank, but regardless, basically 100% damage resist off a single equip is always nice. For the final equip though, the 5-star heal, Sword Emperor's Proof. It recovers all allies' HP by 15% and heals their blind and curse. It's pretty underwhelming. The heal is fairly low and it's not the best since it only cleanses blind and curse. Although I'm wondering why it can cleanse curse, considering that if the rest of the team is cursed, it's most likely that the user would be cursed as well. And if you're cursed, you can't use any equip, so it doesn't really make any sense. I mean, in that case, you might as well just use something like Keratos to cleanse, unless you need either blind or curse in particular to be cleansed, and you need the higher amount of heal from it. Anyways though, this has definitely been one of the longer videos I've made in a while. It's definitely been fun to see all the buffs that these units are going to be getting, and out of all of them, I'd definitely say that Roy is definitely the best. He can actually become a fairly usable DPS with his 300% crit damage passive. And his 20% AoE damage resist is going to be insanely useful in the endgame. As for some honorable mentions though, some include both Arth and Xenon. The reason Arth was chosen is that with his Verdant Dream and a level 4 break crest, his true art is going to be doing a little more than 18,000 break, which is literally insane to think about. That's not even including if you use a break power up item like Bakuzan. And in the case of Bakuzan, Arth's break power on true art would spike to around 25,200 break. Even saying that is crazy to think about, and on stages with a water enemy, this will definitely see some noticeable break to the break bar. The reason why I also chose Xenon is that with his Demon Arts passive, he'll give a demon team 5 arts a second, and he does actually give some magic damage buffing to the team as well as art on his true art, so that's even nicer as well. Definitely nice for mono dark ruin stages. I'd love to see him be ran with Alliance and see a demon team getting 11 arts a second. Definitely really good, especially if you throw someone like Demon King Vox in there just because. But anyways, now that that's out of the way, let me know your thoughts about the units down below. Who are you excited to use? I personally can't wait to use Roy as a DPS on some of the harder stages. But if you did enjoy the video, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and I'll see you later.